Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I have with me today Ms. Cecile Fruman. She is Director, Regional Integration and Engagement in South Asian Region for the World Bank. Welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. So if I can ask you, my first question to you will be in terms of regional integration in South Asia. While we have, bloc like European Union, ASEAN, who are more economically integrated in terms of connectivity, movement of professionals and other things, in the South Asian region, we've seen that although we have a framework like the SAARC, and also under it we have a South Asian Free Trade Agreement, this is the least integrated region in terms of trade and connectivity. So I'm sure that is where the World Bank's role comes into play. If you can give us some idea as to what is the kind of work that you plan to do here, and do you think it is easy to integrate this region?
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the question. And indeed, this is one of the regions that is least integrated, as you mentioned. South Asia intra-regional trade is only 5% of total trade, and we estimate that that's only 20% of what it could be. So if this region were to integrate on a trade level, we could see additional trade of about $44 billion, and that's quite a considerable amount, as we can imagine. This is also a region that is not well integrated in terms of connectivity. It takes 138 hours to move a truck across the border from India to Bangladesh, and there are 22 documents required and 55 signatures. So at many levels, you're right, it is not well integrated. At the same time, we see that the potential for integration is immense. If we compare with ASEAN, as you were mentioning, about 22% of their trade is intra-regional. In the European Union, that's 60%. So the upside is huge for South Asia. The reason at the World Bank we have a dedicated program is because we think that greater integration is a source of growth. It's also a source of prosperity and inclusion. We see benefits in multiple areas, but let me maybe identify three. So I mentioned trade. If we were to have more free trade agreements and seamless connectivity, we could see some of these benefits. If I look specifically on transport connectivity, we have, there's a motor vehicle agreement that was signed between Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal in 2015 that has not yet been fully implemented. We conducted some studies and ran some modeling and some estimates, and we believe that by implementing the motor vehicle agreement, as MVA as it's referred to, considerable gains could accrue to Bangladesh and India. For India, we estimate that national income could increase by 7.6%, and for Bangladesh, 16.6%. That would be through implementing the MVA and seamless transport connectivity. Another key area is electricity trade. This is a region that where there are still many people underserved and where the demand for energy is going to increase. At the same time, all countries have made commitments to move towards renewable sources and greener sources of energy. For a country like India, one of the greatest sources of green energy actually lies to the north in Bhutan and Nepal, which have already invested in hydro and have great potential for more hydro. Countries like India and Bangladesh would stand to benefit from importing that electricity. We've seen some progress in that area, but there's great potential. Sure. We see that we could increase that at least threefold. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the benefits. We've also seen some of the gains, so it's not all bleak. We actually are very optimistic that some very good work has begun and can continue. I'll give you one example. On cross-border electricity trade, we've seen a threefold increase from 2015. So there have been a number of protocols and agreements signed between countries to facilitate that, and there's much more that will be done. Another area that I'd like to highlight is climate change. This is a region that is extremely vulnerable to climate change. Many people about half of the population, we estimate 800 million people, live in an area that is at high risk, either extreme flooding, extreme drought, and climate events know no boundaries. So when a cyclone hits, it will hit indiscriminately across borders. Therefore, there's a great advantage for countries to come together, to pull data, to pull resources, and to come up with common solutions. Mm-hmm. And we've seen very good progress in some areas, such as hydromet, early flood warning systems, disaster risk management.
Sure. If I can ask you, Ms. Fruman, also the fact that, you've talked about the gains and the benefits, and the fact that where the trade can go exponentially to about $44 billion. In India, there is this realization. There had been several other studies that we've discussed about, but what do you think are the fundamental challenges that is stopping this from happening? You talked about the BBIN and the MVA. We've seen how even the Narendra Modi government, when it came to power, it did push BBIN a lot. In fact, in the government's neighborhood first policy, connectivity is a topmost priority. But having said that, there are still several challenges. And in your conversation with Indian officials, what are you highlighting in terms of the challenges and the issues that continue to ail this kind of connectivity?
Yeah. So, in our experience, where regional integration and collaboration works is when there is a clear win-win for the parties involved, because regional integration is difficult. Development even at a country level is very difficult, and we're adding a level of complexity. But when countries can identify an area where both or multiple countries stand to benefit, where there's an economic win and there's a social win, that the gains will trickle down to the population, that the population will see either that they have more reliable access to energy, cheaper energy, or that they have greater livelihood opportunities or access to jobs, that the private sector is thriving, that they're able to trade and export, and that the jobs are of better quality. These are areas where countries are then willing to come together. Mm-hmm. And I do think that in the BBIN area, that sub-region, there are many of these win-wins. We talked about electricity, which not only can be greener, but also cheaper and more secure. We've talked about trade that can open up new prospects for the private sector. Trade and services, for instance. This is a region that is rich in innovation, rich in talent in the IT sector, and huge prospects for e-commerce and trade and services. If we look at, again, climate resilience and coming together to come up with solutions. So it's really starting from where is that win-win? How can we bring the stakeholders together and building off that?
Mm-hmm. We've seen also recently, India is doing a lot of connectivity projects with Bangladesh, and the fact that recently we've started taking electricity from Nepal, it will soon begin. Do you think this is probably the first kind of stepping stone where we can integrate this region? And also the fact that when India talks about neighborhood, it also talks about an extended neighborhood, right, in the framework of Indian Ocean region. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I think you said it just right. It is about step by step. This is an incremental process. It is about starting often bilaterally, building out trilaterally. If we look at electricity, electricity is flowing between Nepal and India because in 2018, the protocols were signed to allow for that to happen. The next step is moving towards integrating Bangladesh in that. The next step is then to move to a fully integrated energy market and power pool. So it is step by step, but I think having the vision and then supporting the actors to make sometimes what can be bold decisions and to implement them and to demonstrate the benefits to the population. I think that's an important part. Mm-hmm. The second part of your question.
Well, I just needed to understand, how do you see that going beyond just the neighborhood in the larger Indian Ocean region?
Absolutely. I think there is a conversation about the broader neighborhood. And many people today are referring to the Indo-Pacific. Mm-hmm. And I am very much convinced that there are opportunities for India that lie to the east, the Act East, that India stands to benefit from working more with East Asia, with ASEAN, from a trade perspective, in terms of making value chains more resilient, integrated more among the value chains. So I think all of these are areas where indeed India stands to benefit.
I believe a large part of your work also entails in connecting these developing countries with global development partners, which the World Bank does. So in terms of India and the larger South Asian region, what is it that you will be doing in that aspect?
So I think there's a role for many partners to come together on this. If we think of in terms of investments in infrastructure, the needs are great. Building more roads, building more railroads, investing in inland waterways, in power. So there's a role for multilateral organizations like ours, for bilateral organizations, and also for the region to come together. Yeah.
So my last question to you will be in terms of all these networks working together, right? Let's say if the BBIN becomes successful and we implement that, and then there is this larger segment of SAARC, and there are other initiatives like the BIMSTEC and other things. Do you think all those can run parallelly, or they need to integrate as one whole kind of a framework? Like as I said, you have like an ASEAN or an EU. Do you think that can be done in this region? Is that a possibility ever?
I think coordination is essential, because you don't want disparate efforts happening in an uncoordinated manner. But I think that the challenges and the opportunities are such that there is room for many actors to come together. And although right now it may seem like a bit of an alphabet soup of BBIN, BIMSTEC, etc., these efforts are actually quite well coordinated. So for instance, if we look at transport infrastructure, there is a transport master plan for BIMSTEC that covers BBIN. So I think having these frameworks and then identifying clearly the role for national governments, subnational governments, regional organizations, and key organizations like ours in coming in support, that's an important part of making this all come together.
Well, just a small sub question from that, which comes to the mind obviously, is the fact that how strong do you think factors like geopolitics play in this, right? And also kind of sudden economic meltdown that is happening in Sri Lanka, which was sort of expected but never really, I don't think people expected it to go down to this level. Then we saw what happened in Afghanistan. So do you think those factors would also be, they will be constraining, but one needs to overlook all that and do business as it is?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. The world is changing around us as we speak, and we never quite know what is going to come next, right? And I think we are in a world of polycrisis. We've had the COVID crisis, and countries are just re-emerging. We have conflict, unfortunately, in places like Afghanistan. We have, macro instability in Sri Lanka. So obviously, these are important factors in the conversation. Geopolitics are present, because when you speak regionally, it is also about accommodating your own imperatives with those of your neighbors. So understanding what each party is bringing to the table and what each party wants from that relationship is absolutely fundamental. Where we see the opportunity is that as South Asia emerges from these polycrises, and we hope that all countries are back on a growth trajectory, post-COVID in particular, and also factoring in the effects of the Ukraine war, we hope that this is a region that will come out stronger, that the growth trajectory will be green, will be inclusive, will be sustainable, and will be better connected, because we're really convinced that connectivity is an important part of the solution and the growth going forward.
Well, thank you so much on that note. Thank you for watching this conversation. With me on camera is Nirmal Poddar. You are watching the Print's YouTube channel.